So just to get us started, I am Khalil Sarin, Mayor of Cleveland Heights, and this is part of a series of conversations, a series of town halls that we're having on basically a weekly basis for a little while to answer some questions, to be available and that kind of thing. So just to get us started, you're here, and you're here with me. Are there any particular topics or questions that any of you would like to discuss tonight? I can pass it around.
I guess I just kind of want to know what the state of affairs is about the rest of your tenure, and if anything's going to change before next year. But also, I want to know if there's been any effect for Cleveland Heights, either from the Ohio budget or from the federal budget, that are going to adversely affect us going forward.
So, as to the first question, things are a little up in the air right now, and that's problematic for a variety of reasons. Uncertainty is always difficult to deal with. As it stands, there is a slight debate about exactly when, but right now it appears, at the very least, without some intervention, that a recall election will be on the ballot in September. And if that does take place, then there's the possibility that in September, once that election is certified, that I will be removed from office. Okay. If that occurs, then the council president takes over as mayor and leaves his seat on council. And given the time frame, I guess, attempts to get up to speed on the various capital projects that we have in the works, including one that I just talked about a little bit earlier today publicly over at Cumberland, and attempts to get up to speed on the budget process as well. It's certainly a strange situation that we find ourselves in, one that we never could have found ourselves in before because we didn't have a mayor. But that level of uncertainty is troublesome, and how I'm attempting to address it right now is to do as much prep work as possible to enable my directors and staff to continue on no matter what happens. I'm trying to do that as much as possible. Frankly, I think that it will be more difficult for us to finish out the year and have a more seamless transition if it's successful. But it's not up to me. It's up to the voters of Cleveland Heights. Now, the other option, and this is the option that I think makes more sense based on timelines. There's some legal debate that we're having right now about whether or not it is actually in line with our charter that the city council called for a recall election at the September 9th primary election. And the reason for that is that when council voted on that recall election, they voted on the 7th of July. Mm-hmm. And there's one interpretation that I think is flawed, where the 7th of July, or perhaps even before that, is the date that you count from in order to ensure that whatever election you are placing this recall on is at least 60 days away. Because that is mandatory in our charter, that whatever election you call for, the recall ballot has to be not less than 60 days away. Now, when council acts, it acts by ordinance or resolution unless there is some specific portion of our charter that says that it can be done in a different way. Like, for instance, they are specifically allowed to add a regular meeting or change their regular meeting schedule by motion instead of by ordinance or resolution. And that's specifically outlined in the charter. So, but otherwise, council acts by ordinance or resolution. And in this case, every ordinance or resolution is required to come to the mayor for my consideration. And that consideration is a 10-day period where I am offered the opportunity to simply sign it into law. The second option is to veto that ordinance or resolution. And then the third option is to do nothing. And after 10 days, if I neither sign nor disapprove of it, it goes into law at that point without my action. Now, that takes us to July 17th. And on July 17th, you know, at the earliest date, if I don't sign the legislation, that's the date that it becomes effective. That's the earliest date that that call for a recall election can become effective under the letter of our charter. And July 17th is less than 60 days from the September 9th primary. Now, I'm not a judge. And so if this went to a judge, that judge would be the one to determine the interpretation of our charter. But the letter of our charter is pretty clear to me that that call can't be effective until at least July 17th. And so that call for an election must be a call for an election in November, because the November election is more than 60 days from when that call is effective. So that's a conversation that we're having. It's a debate that we're having. I know that sometimes people can just decide to ignore things and move forward on the path of least resistance. So I don't know how that debate is going to resolve. I think that it makes a lot more sense to have a longer runway. I think it makes a lot more sense, certainly for my directors and staff, to have a little bit more continuity as we get to the end of the year, because there's a lot of work that happens in the second half of the year, in the last quarter of the year. And my directors really do rely on me to be there to assist, to provide guidance, and creating even more uncertainty in these last days is worrisome. So, but that's the debate that's being had right now about the end of my tenure. But no matter what, if the recall is unsuccessful, whether it's September or November, if the recall is unsuccessful, then I finish out this year. And in my view, that's optimal, because then I get to make sure that the transition to the next mayor's administration is as seamless as possible, as we can be as helpful as possible, because this person is going to be walking into a situation that they are not familiar with. None of the candidates have, and I say this from experience as somebody who walked into the mayor's office for the first time in Cleveland Heights. There's a lot of groundwork that we've done over the last 3.5 years or more to make it a little bit easier for the next mayor. But they're still going to be walking into a situation that they probably think they know better than they do. And so it is incumbent on me as the outgoing mayor to make it as easy as possible for them to hit the ground running in January. So what does that mean for me practically at the end of this term? It means that what I hope to be able to do is, as soon as we have a winner of that election, my hope is to bring them in, to sit them down with each of the directors, have conversations about their goals, about what they need in the next year, to include them at that point in the conversations around next year's budget. any outgoing administration determines the budget for the next year, this can be amended as needed in the next year, so it's not written in stone or anything like that. But I would like to bring that mayor-elect into the process so that we can include their needs and their goals and priorities in the next budget as well. And then the other thing that I'd like to make sure that we do, and this will include staffing in that budget conversation too. I would like to, at the beginning of November, when we have a mayor-elect, because I don't think it's feasible to hire a city administrator right now. I don't even know that the council would confirm a city administrator that I appoint. And so what I'd like to do, as soon as that person is on board, I'd like to sit down with them and help them with our personnel, help them craft the job description for the city administrator that they need, so that we can immediately post it. And by the time January comes around and they're sworn in, they may have someone, a candidate that has applied, that they've been able to vet over the next month and a half before the end of the year, bring people in, have interviews, supported by my staff until the end of the year, when it will be their staff, in order to be able to immediately put forward a candidate to council for council's confirmation. That's just a couple of examples of what I hope the end of this tenure will look like, because this city needs as little strife, as little complication as possible to keep moving forward, to keep our progress going. So then the second question, remind me.
How the Ohio budget and the federal budget cuts, how that will impact Cleveland Heights.
Well, I'll tell you, I think we're still trying to figure that out. The obviously concerns about any federal funding that we rely on, whether it's CDBG or home funding or those sorts of things. There are a lot of programs that we don't directly engage with, and so in that way, we are a bit lucky that we're not sort of having something removed. But one thing that we do know is that the reason why we're not sure how it's going to affect Cleveland Heights just yet is because we've got residents who rely on programs, who rely on nonprofit organizations that rely on federal funding that we might not directly receive, but they do, and our people do. And so when that happens, when even things about like welfare and welfare rules changing and people who receive assistance that doesn't come through Cleveland Heights, but come through the state, when those safety nets get removed, we know what happens. Crime tends to go up. Deaths of desperation go up. Abusive situations, increase. And that is something that will then have an impact on the services that we provide. So, we can anticipate increased health problems that our, fire EMS people have to respond to. We can anticipate more crimes of opportunity, more, thefts and even violent crimes should those safety nets be removed or reduced. And that will have an impact on our, obviously our budget, but also on our community. And those are the things that are most concerning for me, is those almost the heartless decisions that can be made when we're not thinking of people as people, and we're not considering the very obvious ramifications of the decisions that are being made. I'm not exactly sure how Cleveland Heights is going to be able to respond to what might be coming down the line on that, especially if we do see more price increases due to tariffs or anything like that. It'll be sort of a perfect storm of economic desperation that we might have to deal with. We are in a relatively good position financially, though. And so I would also, you don't have to take my word for it. You can take a look at they're unaudited financials right now, but our 2023 unaudited financials are on the website. They are currently going through the state process, and they'll be released to us, and we'll have a conversation with the state auditor about things relatively soon, I assume. And then 2024, we're working on getting all of that out too. But we're in a really good place financially. We've got really large surpluses. We've got, both in our general fund, we've got reserves that are well in excess of like the Government Finance Officers Association guidelines. And in our all funds category, same situation. We've got massive reserves. So I think that we can weather a storm. And I don't think that this storm is going to be permanent. These things ebb and flow. There's a pendulum that swings. And I think that we will come out of this. This is the concern that I have. And this is the concern that I saw as a council member and looking back before I was a council member at how Cleveland Heights dealt with certain things. In 2015, when I was elected to council for the first time, there was a tax increase, an income tax increase that I was asked, because I was appointed first, so I was asked to put that tax increase on the ballot, same ballot that I was appearing on, because we were having financial difficulties. This was after 2008, obviously after 2001, the recession in 2001, and then we got hit in 2008 with the foreclosure crisis. And we were having budgetary issues in Cleveland Heights. We were having major budgetary issues in Cleveland Heights. And so that tax increase was sold to us as extremely necessary, and it was. But what comes next is also important to consider. So we put that tax increase on the ballot. It began to bring in revenue. You want to take it easy. You want to take it slow. You don't want to bring in more revenue and then spend it all automatically, right? You want to be careful about those things. But we spent the next, until 2020, 2021, and then into 2022 with budgets that were extremely austere. We had already been cutting staff, cutting services. There are services that me and my family relied on right here in this room, actually. We had aftercare and summer camps and that kind of thing here at the community center that went away because they cut staff, they cut services, they cut funding for these things, and part of that was completely necessary. The problem is that they did it too long. So we weren't, fixing facilities. We weren't buying new equipment. We weren't making sure that, the job that it took 10 people to do, now we've got 2 people doing it. Well, you're going to see service changes there. And even once we started bringing in more revenue, we didn't start changing our model from an austerity model to an investment model. So when I came into office as mayor, we had a lot of problems that we had to fix that we had been neglecting for a very long time. And I was operating from a budget from the previous administration, because that's how that works. In 2022, we were operating from a budget that I voted on, but I did not craft myself. So there was a lot of investment that I probably would have engaged in 2022 that I didn't have the budget for. And we were still getting our feet under us anyway. So it might not have been smart to just, hit the ground racing. But we have put a lot of money, a lot of investment into facilities, into our people as well. We've increased wages to try to attract and retain people over the last few years. And we should have started that process a little earlier, because we wouldn't have these massive reserves that are not necessary to have. We could have a lot less and still be in very good shape. And so what I think I would advise the next council and the next administration is that through this storm, do not neglect services, Don't neglect investment in our community. We do have the money to spend. We've got money in the bank that we've been saving for a decade. We need to make sure that through the course of the next, hopefully just a couple years until there's a little bit more balance at the federal level. I don't think that we're going to find balance at the state level for a long time, but at least at the federal level, we might find a little bit more balance when it comes to governing philosophy and, you know, how we deal with our economy and that kind of thing. And we should expect that the federal government will come back and be more of a partner with cities, more of a support for cities and the problems that we have in the near future. And so we shouldn't neglect ourselves completely in this, you know, chicken little sky is falling kind of way. If we're not going to get support from the federal government for this program that we need, well, right now we've got money to pay for it ourselves. And so we should, because we still have the need. And so we're going to have to step into the gap. So that's what I'm going to urge the next council and the next administration. We're going to have to step up if the federal government isn't, and if the state isn't. So there are some really concerning things, you know, they're still talking about ending the income tax. They're still talking about dramatic modifications in the property tax, maybe ending the property tax as well, with no real understanding of how to replace the revenue that we need to fulfill our duties to the people that we serve. And I don't know that's a disaster waiting to happen, but I think that cooler heads may prevail even at the State House. So I don't want us to catastrophize too much until we see something a little bit more concrete that we should be more worried about. So that's, I guess, my answer to that question. But I think that when it comes to these things, we're just going to have to step up and fill that gap ourselves. And we do have the reserves to do it. It'll take planning. We'll have to be cautious. But we shouldn't just jump back into an austerity mode and start cutting services because, you know, we don't know when the next president or the next Congress will be a little bit more hospitable and amenable to meeting our needs.
Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else? Questions? Any particular topics? Come join us if you'd like. Intimate group today, so we're just sort of having a conversation about all of the various things that you might want to talk about, any information that I can give. Yeah.
So I understand that there are a number of open positions. What are some of the issues involved with, why would there be such a large number of positions open? You know, why aren't people going for those jobs, or why can't the city attract more people to those jobs?
So, as with most of these questions, this is going to be a complicated answer. And part of that complicated answer has to do with how you, and I at the risk of sounding like a Jordan Peterson, for God's sake, how do you define what an open position is, right? So, in my view, the most important type of open position that you can think of is a position that a department needs to fill, wants to fill, and doesn't have a current, person in that role, right? Otherwise, why would they want to fill it? But there are other ways to define that. There's a budgetary way to define it, and then there's an operational way to define it. So the operational way to define it is the most important to me. And those operational ways to define it, we've got fewer open positions than many people think. I know that there was some rumor out there that we had like these 50 or I don't know how many they were saying open positions. And I think one of the things that they didn't realize is that there are lagging indicators of these things. Part of the reason why people were very confused about that is because they were looking at our employee, like the jobs that we have posted are posted jobs. And they didn't, I guess, take into account that we were hiring seasonal employees for Kane Park when they were looking at the job postings. And so they were just counting job postings and did not sort of take into account that some of those job postings were the hiring push to get people for Kane Park. It may have been lifeguards as well that we were hiring at the time. I'm not sure. But right now, it looks like we've got about 25 jobs posted. There are some that are more difficult to post or to get candidates for, and I can address some of those things. And then there are others that probably need to be removed from the job posting, right now. So for instance, I mentioned earlier that I don't think that it makes any sense for an outgoing mayor in, the end of July to attempt to hire a city administrator, especially since I don't think that at this point the city administrator is all that crucial to getting the things done that we need to accomplish by the end of the year. But more importantly, I think that since it's a confirmable position, and I don't really have a high degree of faith that this council would be interested in confirming a city administrator that I would appoint. Additionally, I don't think that it would be fair to attempt to bring somebody on who, no matter what, at the end of the year, there's going to be a new mayor. And that new mayor may want to bring in their own person. Whoever I would bring in it's not like Jerry Chaikin in Shaker Heights, who had been there for years and years and years and through multiple mayors. This would be somebody who would be joining the team and would be relatively new. Please come on up. We're a small group today, so we're sort of trying to just have more of a conversation. Okay. So city administrators posted, but I should probably take that off of the job postings for now. And then when the mayor-elect, when we have a mayor-elect, then what I would want to do is work with that mayor-elect to sort of just be assisting them in creating the job posting that they want for their city administrator. So in mid-November, we can get that job posting up for them, start receiving applications and giving them to that mayor-elect so that they can review them, help them bring people in that they want to interview. My staff can assist with that. If they would like my input, I would be happy to give it, but it would be their choice. And then by the end of the year, and when they're sworn in, hopefully they would be able to hit the ground running, appoint that person and put them before council for their consideration, and move forward quickly and have a city administrator on board as quickly as possible. But that wouldn't be until we had a mayor-elect. So I can probably take that off. We are hiring for some of the positions that are currently up now. We've, going through interviews. I'm not participating in most of them because most of these I don't need to participate in. And so some of these will be addressed relatively quickly. Others we keep up just generally. And then there are some that aren't even for the administration. Like we've got a deputy clerk position that's for the municipal court. And that's not our domain. So I think that a lot of the conversation about how many job openings we have is a little confused and a little exaggerated. And so that's one important piece of this. But there are positions where we have had a difficult time in a more chronic way. One of those places is in police. Certainly, people's attitudes about police are complicated in our community and everywhere. After we watched a police officer murder a man on camera with two other police officers watching for almost 10 minutes and keeping other people from helping, there was a lot of concern about law enforcement, a lot of concern about police, reasonable concern. And certainly recruitment had a very difficult time after George Floyd was murdered. It's changed a little bit, and we have been hiring police. We recently hired, I think, maybe 8 new officers. But the issue is that we've also got people leaving. We've got people retiring. We've got people. There's always churn in this situation, and in order to get to full staff, if you're below full staff, you have to have more hires than you have exits. And if we're sort of on balance right now, if we're, hiring as many people as we're losing, well, then we're staying where we are and we're not getting to what we've budgeted for. And that's been an issue too. So actually just today I had a conversation with a young person over at Cumberland who wants to explore creating a job preparation, a job training program for law enforcement, for public safety. And, so I know there used to be at the high school, there used to be this career tech law enforcement program. And when the school district and the career tech education program was regionalized, that went away. And I'm not sure if they're doing it in some other place, like maybe Warrensville or something like that, but it's not here. And so, I'd like to work with this young person, work with the school, and try to design some sort of, whether it's with the schools or in some other fashion and just with the community, some program to introduce young people in our community into, what it means to be in law enforcement so that we can sort of grow our own. And people who know this community might want to protect and serve this community in a real way. So that's one way that, I hope to address and hope to sort of leave that for the next administration to build on. Hope to address, obviously, recruitment issues in a long-term kind of way, but also to help create more of a connection between police and the community, because that's strained as well. And it's not unreasonable that it is because of the nature of the work and sort of the almost antagonistic, by necessity, nature of policing with a community, even though it's in service to the community. So that's one area where we've got chronic issues with recruitment. But another place is in our service, the public service, the people who are paving roads or filling potholes or picking up garbage or mowing, the medians. Those sorts of positions can be very difficult to fill. Certainly now, because interest in those kinds of jobs ebbs and flows as well. But here in Cleveland Heights, I think we've had a problem for a long time, and it goes back to that disinvestment, not just in our facilities and equipment, but in our people. For years, our laborers, the people who are in Local 860, who are doing that kind of work have, sort of foregone wage increases. They have accepted staffing cuts and continue to do their best to try to meet the demand of this community when it comes to service level. But, staffing cuts and equipment problems and disinvestment in facilities and all of those things take a toll. And the fact that they have been, I would say, so patient with the city, that they have accepted, not getting raises, even though cost of living is skyrocketing over time, those sorts of things. I respect their sacrifice. I respect the work they do, of course. But what it means is that our wages are low. They were Laborers Local 860 was the first negotiation I had when I became mayor. It was in 2022. I was being told horror stories by people about how they were going to, be really mean to me and, combative and all of this. But the interaction that I had with them was cooperative. It was genuine, and I frankly I felt happy to work with them on that negotiation. And they were very generous with us, more generous than I knew at the time. And certainly as things progressed from 2022, and we saw this massive inflation and price increases, looking back, I wish that I had been a little bit more generous with them. And you know, they were very kind. They were very sensitive with us. But you know, in 2025, at the end of that contract, we're in negotiations now. We're almost done. We're going to be submitting a proposal to the council and to the union membership for their consideration. And I think this time around, for operational necessity, to be able to recruit, because we do have an aging workforce. And if we can't recruit new people into that workforce, we're going to be in a very difficult situation, not being able to find people to do the work as people retire. So we have to be able to recruit, we have to be able to retain. And so from my perspective, this contract was an opportunity for us to correct really a mistake over time. You know, it seemed, and I think there's an argument to be made that in the budgetary difficulty that we have had over the last 10 years, that it made a lot of sense to hold wages down, to let wages stagnate for a while until we could get on our feet. But I think we waited too long. But I think now is a time where we can right size that. And so the contract that I'm putting before council is probably going to be looked at as a little rich. But I think that it's necessary, not just to, give them a rightful wage, an appropriate wage, but also because the city, both the people and the government, we need to be in a position where we are paying people enough and, to recruit people into the service and to retain them once we have them here. Otherwise, what's the point? You know, if we can't get people in the door to do the work, then we're not going to be able to do the work. And if we're not doing the work, then what's the point of the government? We're not providing the services. But that takes time. We need to get more people in the door and on staff to do that. So that's another place where we've had some chronic issues recruiting and retaining. And the major reason why is because wages have been stagnating for the last, probably 12 years, maybe more. Beyond that, though, I think we're in pretty good shape when it comes to open positions. I'm looking at the list right now, and it's some of these might even be able to get taken down as things get filled. If we post something and we fill it, the listing doesn't automatically go away. So I sometimes I have to remind people to, hey, okay, let HR know if you still need that post up, because that's not an automatic situation. And some of these postings will be evergreen. So like police officer lateral transfer, we're just keeping that up because we're always on the lookout for more police, certainly while we're not, at absolute full staffing when it comes to our budgeted positions. So we're going to keep that kind of thing up. And we've constantly got our police academy going, and we recruit from police academy as well if somebody isn't already in police academy for another agency. So those are the sorts of things that we don't really have a lot of postings. I know that there's been a lot of talk about turnover in this term, and people who think that turnover for some reason is higher than it has been in the past. And I don't know if anybody paid attention to this, but I did an analysis year over year turnover. All of the exits for any reason, whether it's a termination, a retirement, resignation. We've had people who have passed away who were, here, all of those reasons. And what I found looking at year over year exits, in the 10 years before my term as mayor, the average, year turnover was higher than in my first 3 years as mayor, average turnover, average exits anyway. And so since we're not done with 2025, I didn't want to necessarily count 2025, but even now we're not trending higher than the previous 10 years before my tenure as mayor. So turnover isn't higher under me than it was before. It's actually lower. So I wish people would get that data point correct.
Can I ask a quick follow-up?
Sure.
Since you mentioned it in terms of the police, just do you have an opinion on whether there should either be preference or an extra effort made to recruit within, Cleveland Heights residents?
I think that we should absolutely prioritize recruiting locally. There is, something about knowing the place. There's something about being of the place, whether you're, you were born here or you've just been here and you understand this place. There's something about that helps you understand the people and see them as people. Because that's one of the traps of policing, is that it can be easy, and it's not just policing. A lot of these types of, prison guard, we all know the experiment, right? You start to see people in a particular way. And it may take effort, may take predisposition to maintain your view of the person sitting across from you as a person, not as a suspect, not as a threat. Maybe they can be those things too in any given, circumstance, but they are also a person. And you don't want to forget that personhood, because someone you may see as a threat, if you don't see them as a person, might be that you see them as a threat and it's not warranted. And that can lead to dangerous situations that we have a responsibility to avoid. We have a greater responsibility than your average person when you are given the authority to put somebody in a cage or put somebody in the ground. When you have that authority, when you are given that power, that increases your responsibility. And, so from my perspective, anything that can help a person see the people that they are protecting and serving as people, anything that can lend itself to that attitude, is an important thing to consider. And so I think recruiting locally assists with that. And just knowing the community, knowing the locale, knowing the surrounding communities even, and their impact on our community, is an important, reason to hire locally, whether it's Cleveland Heights specific or, some of our neighbors. That may also, have a positive impact on someone's fit in our community. So I think it's a good idea to emphasize that. Sure. Anything else? Because I have a couple things that I could just talk about too, some current event stuff.
Just going off. Oh, no.
So do we know, do we have data on where they're coming from, the recruits? Is there a specific area or areas that the police are being recruited from, or?
So I don't have that kind of data in front of me right now, and I don't think that we've analyzed it. What I can do potentially is take a look at where people currently live. Now, we do have a lot of officers who live in Cleveland Heights. And I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing to have, people who are in policing, living in the community that they are serving. not all of our police live in Cleveland Heights. I could do an analysis of sort of their current home address or, that kind of thing. I haven't done that kind of analysis yet, but that's a good idea, and I think maybe I shall.
Going with that, I was going to ask if there's ever been a requirement that police on the force here are residents. I think some cities, maybe this is old-fashioned or from years ago. I was just curious about that because I see the benefit in having our police living among us as neighbors. And like you were saying a moment ago about seeing like the humanity in someone and maybe they're a suspect at some point. The other side of the coin is how the community views police. And if they're your neighbor, you see them as my neighbor so-and-so, not necessarily that's officer, there's your neighbor.
Yeah, I think so. Familiarity does not always breed contempt, right? It can mean that you see that person as part of your community as opposed to someone who is imposing themselves on your community. From a legal perspective, cities are prohibited from mandating that any employees, police or any other employees, live in the jurisdiction. The famous case was the Fannie Lewis law, I think, that was, basically eliminated by the state. In the city of Cleveland, they required that their employees live in the city of Cleveland, and this was eliminated a while back. I think that one of the issues was that many of the police didn't want to live in Cleveland. And I think you see that in other areas of the country as well, where those sorts of rules existed. Sometimes you'll see that, all of the police in a particular city where they were mandated to live in that city were all clustered in a particular area. You saw some of that. And to some degree, in a place like Cleveland, a place like Cleveland Heights and in Northeast Ohio, but most specifically in those areas with higher concentrations of black people, policing is not as diverse as, say, our community is. Policing, and we've had historical trends that show that as well. And it's probably better now than it ever has been throughout our history. But certainly when that law was in place, the police force did not reflect the community that it was policing. And I think for that reason and, issues of white flight from areas where black people were moving in, you saw a lot of resistance to rules like that. And I'm sure that lawmakers were lobbied or, it might have been struck down in the courts. I don't remember exactly how that went down, but those sorts of things, that's why that changed. And we can no longer mandate that as an employer. One thing that we can do, and this doesn't really have the same effect, is for those people who are emergency responders and need to be able to, come on the scene when there's an emergency, we can require that they live in the county or in an adjacent county so that they can get here if we need them. Doesn't really achieve the same effect, but it's for a different reason. So that's something that we can do. But the mandate that they live in Cleveland Heights, no. But the idea that we can prioritize recruitment and emphasize those activities that encourage people in our community to pursue that as a career. We can't force everybody to go into policing or something like that, but at least we can make it a little bit more obvious as a possibility for people in this place. But I will say, police in this community is a complicated topic because we've got people who run the gamut of their attitudes about police and policing. We've got people who want to abolish policing completely, and then we've got people who will, as they say, back the blue no matter what, and within that spectrum, we got a lot of different attitudes in this city. Generally, I think Cleveland Heights supports our police force, in a general way. I think that's the case in our community. And that doesn't mean that, policing, even in our community, is perfect. It doesn't mean that our police division is perfect. There are problems just like with every, and there are problem officers in every force. And I think that I've tried to address that and those constant issues of favoritism impacting how people are given opportunities for advancement in police, or which people are disciplined and how they're disciplined for similar actions. One example, when I became mayor, I asked the police chief that she was planning to retire. She was retiring at the end of 2021, but I asked her to stay on for a little while longer to help me and the person who had been selected as the new chief under the city manager form of government, so we could get up to speed, still have her there as a resource, so stay on for a few months. And she did, thankfully. But in that first year, there was this, plan. She would retire. The new chief had already been selected, and the new chief had been in a position called administrative captain. The administrative captain was sort of the chief's, second. The chief, the person who worked very closely with the chief, and he was the person that the chief recommended for succeeding her, and the city manager selected him to fill that role. And so then there was a question about who would fill his role. How do we backfill the administrative captain role? And, I'm a new mayor, and I'll tell you, as a mayor, dealing with police is complicated is a good word, but there are pitfalls potentially, right? And so you need to be careful. You need to, you don't want to create an antagonistic relationship. You want to provide support. The mayor is also the public safety director. So it's my duty to make sure they have the tools, the policies, the training that allow them to fulfill their duties in the way that this community needs them to, right? And I'm also the person who determines these issues of promotion and that kind of thing. And it was the strangest thing. Ultimately, I ended up not filling the administrative captain position. I decided that it wasn't necessary for a captain to fill that position, that a lieutenant could fill that role. And so that's what I ended up doing. And so I filled that role. I promoted somebody into an administrative lieutenant position to assist the chief. But the really curious thing that happened in 2022 was the candidate that they proposed to me. And I think it's possible, I guess, that they thought that I would just rubber stamp it because that's probably what the city manager had done, for I don't know, for all time. But I took a close look because this was something that was going to be important, and it was the particular candidate that they proposed was a person that was on the Giglio list. The Giglio list is a list of people that prosecutors are required to disclose to defense attorneys that they've got some issue of integrity that makes it more difficult for them to be believed on the stand. Now, I'm a new mayor, new public safety director, and this is a candidate for a captain position that is brought to me. So I have a tough decision to make. Do I antagonize police and say, wait a minute, no, this is not something that I can put my name on? And I don't know all of the relationships, but I know that in any organization where discretion, where subjectivity is a possibility, it will lead at least to the possibility of favoritism, of those sorts of things. And so I rejected that candidate. I think that in all likelihood that has caused me some problems over the last 3 years. But what I am trying to do and trying to sort of leave a legacy of is standardizing discipline, training, opportunities, and removing to the degree that you can the kinds of subjectivity that might lead to an uneven application of our policies, an uneven offering of opportunities for advancement, those sorts of things. And one of the ways that I did that was to try to remove disciplinary decisions from the chain of command. So the way that it used to work is basically if an officer misbehaved with a resident, maybe they were extremely rude to a resident who was asking them for help. Well, that resident could complain. Their supervisor, maybe their sergeant, would hear the complaint and decide whether or not, Officer X needed, some discipline or something like that. Or it could get bumped up to, lieutenant or up and up, to the chief ultimately, right? For these disciplinary decisions. Now, if you're talking about an officer and a sergeant, and that sergeant is, commanding a bunch of other officers, a bunch of officers in a group, and so that's their supervisor. They've got different relationships with each of those officers. Maybe there's an officer they like a lot. Maybe there's another officer that they don't like at all. And there's the possibility there, because we're all people and police are people too, for even if they don't consciously realize it, that the same or a similar act might lead to that sergeant deciding, well, this person did that for this bad reason. This person, they had a bad day, or they were misunderstood or something like that, because I don't see them that way. They don't seem like a rude jerk to me. Those sorts of things can cause chronic endemic problems in an organization where some people feel like they are not getting fair treatment. And I don't think that our organization is any different. That's based on the stories that I've heard, the conversations that I've had with police. And so, that's the sort of thing that I took those disciplinary questions to some degree out of that chain of command by creating a Bureau of Professional Standards. Actually, there was a lieutenant, very experienced, high level of integrity, named Captain Ernest Williams. Well, Captain Ernest Williams now, he was Lieutenant Williams then. I promoted him to captain to lead that bureau. So instead of creating that administrative captain position, filling that, created that administrative lieutenant position, filled that, and then created a new captain position in order to create a more fair, more transparent way to investigate police misconduct, whether it's criminal or just policy violations and complaints from residents and visitors. And that's sort of a first step. And as I announced in that press conference that we recently had related to grand jury that came back about that officer involved, the fatal officer involved shooting that we had last year, Christian Tyson Thomas. I'm going to be introducing a police review commission, legislation to create a police review commission to bring our residents in to review our policies, to review disciplinary actions, commendations, recruitment strategies, because I think that, again, with the awesome responsibility of the authority to put someone in a cage or put somebody in the ground, our community needs to have a seat at the table, because I think right now, the people that we elect, whether it's to council or even the mayor, we're politicians. I'm obviously not a great politician, but in this case, I think all of the people who need to go get elected again to continue doing this work have certain pressures that we may try to resist. I know I do, because I try to do the right thing, whether it's politically advantageous or not. I'm sure other politicians do too. Not all of them, but some. But those pressures still exist. And so I don't know that the elected positions that we have in this community are as well suited to bring the community's perspective into those policy discussions as people who might be appointed. Because, yeah, maybe they want to keep getting appointed, but it's a little bit of a different situation. It's not quite as political. And so bringing the community in, I think, could be a really important way to standardize, and to create more alignment between our community's values and those policies and disciplinary and recruiting strategies.
In terms of the police hiring, my apologies if you already covered this. I came in late. But I know a couple of years ago, most of the police force came forward in council meetings because they were concerned about hiring from outside rather than promoting. You already covered that? And so that touches partially on what you're talking about, I think. But what was the outcome of those discussions?
So that was a particular situation where I'd proposed to the council that they remove, and it was primarily focused on a specific issue that we were having with the fire service, not even with police. But in this case, the proposal, and cities do it in a bunch of different ways. Often the chief position is not in the civil service in other jurisdictions. That's not how we do it here. At that point, what I was trying to do was, I'd proposed to the council that we remove the chief position, and in fire we have an assistant chief position. Remove those from civil service. And in part it was because I thought that it was extremely important now that we have an elected mayor who is elected with the mandate of the people to express a vision, express a set of priorities, express a philosophy and principles, and then the people choose that person to implement that vision, those principles. And policing is a big part of municipal government. And how we police, what our policies are. That's an important piece of what makes us a community. And like I said, when the community is not involved in those decisions or less involved in those decisions because it's sort of a black box sometimes, you can find this disconnect. And so I thought that it would be important that the chief be a little bit more beholden to the elected leader of the city. And there was some concern about that because civil service offers certain protections. A mayor and safety director has less flexibility to remove a chief if they are protected by civil service. It can also mean that a chief who is doing things that are not in line with the priorities of the community is protected from being removed, even though they are not sort of in alignment with the community. And so that can be an issue. And that was one of the issues that I wanted to address. But the major issue that I wanted to address was this constant refrain of nobody wants to be promoted to chief because you're not in the union anymore. So there are, certain issues of you don't get overtime. You don't, and that's a big one. That's a really big one in fire and in police, because you can, if you're getting overtime as a captain, you decide, I'm gonna go work the parade and get overtime as a captain. If you're working the parade and you're the chief, you're not getting overtime. And so a captain might ultimately get more compensation at the end of the year than you, right? As somebody who makes less than many of my staff, I didn't see the problem with that, but people do, apparently. But in this case, the civil service rules also required that we promote to chief and assistant chief from within. And so we're put in this rock hard place situation where people in the service don't want the promotion because they don't want to leave the union and lose, certain benefits, certain protection that, comes from being a part of a bargaining unit. And there's a good reason why the chief is not in that unit, because they're, sort of top management in that organization. But losing those protections means that you've got less demand from, the officers to become the chief, to advance into that position. And so expanding our ability to recruit for that position was something that I thought was important, because I didn't want a future mayor to be handcuffed. I didn't want a future mayor to be sort of held hostage almost, and essentially have to offer basically the same benefits that the bargaining unit gets, or something like that, in order to recruit and attract somebody from within. It wasn't because I wanted to find somebody from outside. In fact, with fire, I had a perfectly great candidate who is the fire chief right now. He's a great guy, Chief Harry. I wasn't concerned about my ability to recruit and put somebody in that role, but I was concerned about this ongoing narrative that it's a difficult role to fill. And so I wanted to provide the next mayor with a little bit more flexibility around that. Ultimately, I was able to do exactly that. And it wasn't through, the council didn't like my idea of removing them from the civil service, which is fine. That's their prerogative. So they did not support it. But what I was able to do is convince the Civil Service Commission to make some changes in the civil service rules, which would allow me to recruit for the chief and assistant chief positions from outside if necessary. And they would be held to the same standards as anybody that we would be promoting from within. They would be subject to the same testing, but we could potentially recruit from outside, which just expands the universe of people that are eligible to even qualify for the role. And that's what that situation was.
Could I ask two related questions? One would be, okay, you're talking about a lot of higher level management types of departmental positions. So you have a few critical positions open now, but then in terms of the bulk of maybe non-fire or non-police, where do you see the largest employment need? Like, where are the vacancies?
So yeah, we spoke about this a little bit earlier, but it's fine. I don't mind revisiting because it's an important point. Where I see the most important, most crucial employment needs now are in two related areas. And, you know, we've just sort of finished negotiation with Laborers Local 860. They are the union that represents employees in public works and some employees in parks and recreation. And, you know, this negotiation process is, I hope, wrapping up pretty soon. We'll be submitting our proposal to the council and to the union membership for their consideration, and I hope that they approve what we've come to an agreement on. That's the place, because that population, I think Drew had a question, but that's the population that I think has withstood the most wage stagnation, and they've experienced a lot of cuts over the last, I'm not exactly sure, maybe 15 years, maybe more. Well, okay, so in 2022, we were working under the city manager proposed a budget to council. We approved that budget for 2022. I was on the council that approved it. The finance director at the time, Amy Himmeline, basically said that it was necessary to have a 30% across the board non-salary cut. So this, or at least not for sort of our permanent full-time positions. But what that meant is that we weren't investing in equipment, we weren't investing in materials and facilities. We weren't expecting to give, wage increases to a substantial amount. And we also, though, even outside of that 30% non-salary cut, we weren't building our staff either. So, that budget was not an investment budget. Oh, we've had surpluses for years. Yes. So, this was the thing. Yeah. Over the last, I don't know, maybe since 2013, 2012, 2010, something like that, we have been cutting services, cutting staff, either through attrition or otherwise, pushing off investment in repairs to the point, and this is probably the thing that people don't understand the most about what it's been like to be the first mayor. I walked into an organization where learned helplessness was the rule. Because for so long they had begged the administration for support, and they were told no so consistently. Can we please repair this ceiling? It's falling down on us. No. Those sorts of things. Hey, can we get new police cars? Our feet are going through the floor. Can we invest in our police? No. They had been told no so consistently that they stopped asking. And what that meant for me is that they weren't asking me either, even though I was asking them to ask me. Yeah. So, and what that means is that I'm not getting information. I'm not getting bad news. People don't know this, but I love getting bad news. I mean, I hate that the bad news exists, but I love getting it. because that means that we can start to do something about it. But when you're not asking for what you need, I'm not just going to automatically know you need it. And so that's been one of the most difficult struggles of this term. And it's born by that, by this austerity mindset that even though we've got these massive surpluses that we've built up over time because our property values have been increasing, and that increases our property tax revenue, our income tax, the increase that we passed in 2015 has had a major impact. So we have been building surpluses for years and just not investing in them, allowing attrition to reduce force, those sorts of things. And, so right now, one of our most crucial places where we need to build is in our, public works, parks and rec, so that we can start getting back to the level of service that, people remember from whenever they remember it from.
I think a week or two ago, somebody on Facebook Chatter had photographed the pavers in front of this rec center that have the Plymouth Heights logo. And so it's semi-skilled labor that it's hard to find anyway. But that sort of thing, there's a lot of little maintenance things on like that are really quick things on that apparently we don't have the workforce for it. And is it partially that you just can't find the talent, or you can't find contractors, or that there's nobody to take care of hiring?
That's part of it, but some of it is just priority setting and triage. So when it comes to focusing our attention on the necessary repairs, we're thinking about the fact that the roof might collapse on the service garage first, and that needs to be repaired. We're thinking about the fact that at the service garage, we've had to rope off and restrict access to certain portions of that property because bricks might fall on workers' heads from that building. And so focusing on getting those larger things has taken a lot of bandwidth. And we've had a lot, especially when it comes to investment in the community, investment in, it's a good problem to have, but it also reduces our capacity to focus on those things. So, good example, ARPA money. That took a lot longer than it should have to determine how to spend. And part of that was because we are unlike other cities. The fact that I was the first mayor meant that there were people who were not used to or not comfortable with a mayor leading the process. In other cities, what you saw is ARPA money was given to a city and the mayor said, these are the priorities for how we're going to spend this money. And for the most part, you saw councils get on board and support and cooperate with that mayor's vision for how that money would be spent. In Cleveland Heights, we saw something different. We saw the council, and I had personal experience with this, council members that tended to be less combative with me told me in no uncertain terms, this isn't yours, Mayor. We're determining how this money is spent. Now, there were, situations where we're going through the process. They're trying to figure out what they're going to do with it. And I'm proposing things like, hey, how about this? And every so often they would say, yeah, sure. But that situation, it began before the change in government. And we allocated not enough, but a substantial amount of ARPA dollars to our sewer system. We should have probably put about $10 million more into it. But that money, and especially the scramble, once council had made their determinations to some degree about how they wanted to spend a lot of that money, meant that the administration had to pivot. And there were certain things that on top of all of the other work that we were doing, the work trying to make deals with Leopardo to improve facilities, the work on developments like Taylor Tudor, or the all of those things. We had to pivot and start to include all of the work that it takes to go from council's idea of how to spend it to actually being able to legally spend it and survive a federal audit later. And so that means that, law, planning, finance, public works in certain situations, all has to sort of bifurcate our attention, and certainly the mayor's office as well, so that we can make sure, because there's a hard deadline for when we have to allocate this money. And so doing that meant that there were a lot of other things that we were already doing, and then this was piled on top of it. And we only have so much capacity, period. We don't have infinite capacity. And so I know that there are things that we want to be able to address that to a lot of people probably seem like it's very simple to do so. And I can go tell somebody, find a contractor to fix that out front. Do it today. And then there are 70 other things I have to deal with that day, and the next day, and the next day. And if it gets done, that's great. But it's entirely possible that it doesn't, because I don't control people's actions. I just lead, right? And not everything gets done perfectly. That's for damn sure. And I obviously, it all rolls up to me. It does.
Well, and that's not what I was getting at. I was just saying, where's the shortage of, because I know even trying to get something simple done on my own house, I often end up doing it myself because I can't find a contractor.
I think, I know Drew had a question.
He'll be back.
Okay, well, would you grab that microphone though? I did want to.
Paul had a question, or?
Well, there was another thing that I wanted to bring up, and this was something that I just learned about today. So this morning we got a call from the Cuyahoga County Board of Health, and they had some people out testing, as they do, various waterways, and when they called me and told me, they said it was Doane. Obviously, it's Dugway because it's over by Cumberland. And they had tested some of the water, and they realized that a lot of water from Cumberland Pool was leaking into groundwater, into the storm water, and then into the brook. So I think maybe they got the call at around 10. Early afternoon, I'm over at Cumberland with, our facility superintendent, our director, to discuss what we can do. I mean, we've had some discussion before I got there as well, talking about that, right? It's a massive problem, and it's massive in two different ways. One, the leak is accelerating. It started off relatively small, but over time, as leaks do, they create the channel that they are, exiting from. And so we got to do something about it. And we, yeah.
So that would be like in the past, there's been sewage leakage, so there's bacterial.
Well, it's actually chlorinated. Well, what's interesting about that? One of the conversations that we had, there was sort of an indication that in a certain respect, this is almost not, but almost helpful in that way, but it's problematic in a bunch of different ways. And we've been completing repairs at Cumberland, most recently, repairs that meant that we had to open a little, late this season. But we identified and fixed some massive leaks. But it's a 100-year-old pool. And Yep, and we're bringing that back. So in 2022, we had a series of conversations about a rebuild of Cumberland Pool. Now, the response to that was almost violent, and so and part of the reason for that, I believe, is that the timelines that were being forecasted for that construction project were difficult for people to stomach, because they were talking about potentially, certainly closing for one season, maybe impacting the next season. And that's a problem. But I've come to realize that this was at a time, I believe, when the forecasting for cost, for whether or not you can get supplies and materials in, the supply chain issues that we were having for a while, maybe elongated some of those time frames to a point where it was just not feasible to do the project then, because it would have taken too long, and that sort of thing. So, and people were pointing to other communities that had done projects before that took less time, which doesn't mean that it will take less time at that present moment. So, but it is what it is. So people were very upset about that. I was too. I didn't want that long a timeline. I didn't know exactly how we were going to avoid it yet, but ultimately we kicked the can down the road a little bit, because we wanted to make sure that whatever we did was on balance positive for the people of Cleveland Heights. And I didn't think that we were going to be able to do a rebuild that wouldn't just cause more strife than, happiness. So, but I knew that we needed to do some repairs. So we have done repairs over time, done some massive repairs recently, but all of that work, in all likelihood, also has a cascading impact on other systems in the pool, because it's a 100-year-old pool. And as many of us with 100 or more year old houses know, some of those systems can be a little tricky to deal with. So, but we've just recently heard about this particular problem. We knew that we had leaks. That wasn't a surprise. We've known that we've had leaks for a very long time, since before I was mayor. And when I say we, I mean the administration knew. I don't know that council was really all that informed. But in this case, though, this is sort of a new issue, a new acute issue that we have to address. And there are potentially two major, systems in the pool that are contributing to this leakage. So what I'm hoping that we can do is isolate, because one of them is the main drain. The other are these footers that we use in part for filtration, intake, and outflow into the pool, to take water through the filters and then back into the pool. And we think that those are leaking, and we think that the main drain is leaking.
Is the city liable or accountable to the Board of Health or EPA in any way for,
Absolutely. Yep. Which is why we need to figure out how to fix it as quickly as possible. Well, at the very least, Board of Health, I'm aware of. And it might be that Board of Health is empowered in some way, to enforce that kind of thing. But I think what we're going to find here is that we will be cooperative and work with the Board of Health. I believe that we'll be able to finish out the season, try to do what we can to stopgap between now and the end of the season. But, and this goes back to bandwidth, we have to pivot, because contracting at the municipal level is not always the easiest thing to do. In particular, when, like right now, for instance, we have to wait until, on council's schedule potentially to start certain aspects of the contracting process. But right now, we know about this issue now. We were informed about this issue this morning. Our next step is to diagnose a little bit. What I've asked Parks and Rec to do, I I don't even know if this is a good idea, but it was the idea I had. If we think that it could be the main drain or the footers, let's block the main drain and sort out exactly what percentage of the problem is caused by the main drain, because we can temporarily just plug that. We don't need to use it until we drain the pool anyway. Let's plug it. Let's see how much of the problem that resolves, at least, so that we have a better understanding about what's contributing to what. That could, I'm crossing my fingers here that that's the majority of the issue, because if that's the majority of the issue, then maybe we can eliminate the majority of the issue immediately. If not, then we'll have to recalculate. But, that's sort of a first step to diagnose where the problem actually exists. And then the second step is to immediately full court press on a contracting process to get a contractor, if it's humanly possible, to be on site the day after the season closes to start work. If we can make that happen, then hopefully we can get the work done before winter hits. And then we are not in a position next year where that administration is, getting yelled at by people who want to swim laps and the pool isn't open. You know what I mean? I don't want to put any mayor in that situation. So, my hope is, and of course, there are other priorities that all need to be addressed, but that's a major one, that contracting process. And so when it comes to those little things and it comes to the workforce issue and where the crucial workforce needs are, part of it is, and this is a major part because they do important work and we've neglected them for a long time, is those people who are out there on the road plowing or, again, mowing those 23 acres of median strips that we have in this city. Just a bunch of grass. Those people, recruiting more people to do that work. The perfect example is the median strips. We had 10 people on that job in the season where those need to be mowed. We've got 2 doing that work. That's what I inherited when I became mayor. It's hard. It's hard to recruit. It's hard to retain. But the other piece of getting that work done is the capacity to do the contracting work the right way. And that's a multi-level issue. Last year in 2024, we had a couple different problems. Specifically in Parks and Rec, we had a director that was notoriously terrible at contracting, to the point where he was just ignoring the law, ignoring rules, signing contracts when he did not have the authority to do so, which put everybody in a bad spot, because then, the law department has to go back and try to correct these issues, because technically we're not actually obligated to pay somebody for the work that they've done. So we have to go back and fix a contract that was never presented to the only person in the organization who can sign contracts. The mayor isn't even allowed to delegate that authority under our charter. So that issue, the issue of him sort of unilaterally selecting contractors that really weren't qualified for a particular job, and then signing the contract, having them do the work, and then saying, why aren't you paying them? So finance and law having to sort of clean up after that. Obviously, we had a finance department where for all of 2024, I had the damnedest time getting a qualified permanent finance director in place, and going back to whether or not people are willing to tell me bad news when I'm asking the interim finance director, do you need more people? I'm being told no. So, those sorts of things going on mean that we have to build capacity in the structure that manages those contracts. So one way that I've done that is by increasing our staff in the higher levels of public works, for instance. because a lot of the issues that we were facing had to do with capital projects, and our public facilities, for I think some really ridiculous reasons, are managed by Parks and Rec. Public properties is under Parks and Rec. That's not an appropriate place for it to be. I think Parks and Rec should be focused on our natural park spaces and our recreation programming. Well, you know what? Yeah, and this is something that I'm working on too. I think we've talked about this. What I'm looking at right now is bringing in an assistant director of Parks and Rec to focus exclusively on natural park spaces, because I think our director is really accomplished and really adept at our programming and
he's
those
really
sorts of
good at that.
recreation, programs. Yeah. So, but public properties right now is under Parks and Rec. I'm working on shifting it to Public Works, where I think it belongs. But in order to be able to do that, I had to make sure I wasn't adding duties to Director Klingscale, who was already overworked because she hadn't been given enough resources. And so I made sure that I let her know. Obviously, we promoted Tony Ferrone to an assistant director position to focus on operations in Public Works. But then I also worked with the director to create a position, another assistant director position, to focus on capital projects. And we hired a phenomenal candidate, Virginia Carter, to fill that role. We also hired another phenomenal candidate, Eugene Cranford, to fill a role as a capital projects manager to work with Virginia Carter. And with that added capacity, those contracts, that work can be done through the partnerships with the private contractors that we work with in a much more reasonable, effective way. And so that's, additional capacity for the work that needs to get done.
It's getting late, and I had a question that probably is a long one, but would it probably tap your expertise as well, in that you were talking about easing the transition to the extent that you can. I don't know how well they're playing with you on the other side, but
I think, use the mic.
I was wondering how you were easing the transition in terms of developments, ones that are going on. I guess, how badly can it get screwed up? I hope not that badly, but...
Well, okay. So this is a tough one. I think that I was elected because one of the things that I committed to as a candidate was to be aggressive in our pursuit of the redevelopment of Cleveland Heights. Yeah, and I know that no offense, some people have a negative impression of developers. They think that they're out to take advantage of us, and yeah, no, there are absolutely developers out there who do want to take advantage, right? They and that it is what it is. Developers are people too. They run the gamut. But the idea that the public sector can engage in the redevelopment in our system without the private sector is a ludicrous idea, right? We can't do it alone. We can't build the houses. We can't, build the new commercial spaces. That's not the public sector's role in the system that we're in. And so we work with developers in order to make those things happen. The private capital, it dwarfs our capacity, our financial capacity. So what we have to do is be a place where private capital wants to go, where it wants to go without feeling like it has to take advantage of us in order to be profitable in order to have an easy time building something. So that's a philosophical thing, whether or not we should be a hospitable place for development to happen. And there are a lot of ways that we can be inhospitable, and Cleveland Heights' reputation is well earned as an inhospitable place. This is part of the reason why we switched the form of government in the first place. Part of the sale for that system was we can elect a mayor that will help us bring development back in Cleveland Heights. And so that's what I set about to do. But not everybody's on board. People are on board in general. They're on board with the idea that, yeah, we should encourage development. But when you press somebody on the specifics, and I'm talking about the somebodies who make the decisions, when you press them on the specifics in a specific circumstance with a specific development on a specific deal, well, what about this development? Are we encouraging it or are we inhibiting it? Well, this one, this is different because, right? And so the danger right now, I mean, there are some developments right now that I'm not going to talk about. And that's just because, some of the stuff isn't right. But I don't like to get in front of developers who are trying to do something, who are working to do something, because getting in front of them and talking about their project without, working through it with them can be a way to inhibit their actual project and kill it. So, but there are developments right now that are under consideration that we are trying to figure out a way to encourage, to ease the path, to make sure that the thing that they want to do, which I think is good for our community, can actually happen. Because there are a lot of barriers in the way, zoning barriers most particularly, and the need for a developer to be able to navigate that in a fair way. But then you get back to the philosophy of these things. I am concerned that whoever takes my role next, whether it's due to a recall and then the council president takes over, or whoever the next mayor is who's elected, may have a philosophy that is more in line with the influence of the naysayer. And it will always be with us. We saw it most recently with Mr. Volpe's attempt at a development over on Cedar. The council members said that they were in favor. They liked the project. But apparently they thought that the process that, I guess, Paul Volpe and the Planning, Neighborhoods, and Development Department went through in order to do this project and introduce it to the council, they did not find that. Well, I'm gonna move on a little bit because I could get into a rabbit hole on that. But ultimately, that project died. It could have been 3 new families on a vacant lot that had been a vacant lot for 70 years, has no other reasonable use. I know that people wanted it to be park space. It's a terrible location for park space. It's on a thoroughfare. It's Well, I've seen people walk across it. I've seen a person very recently I saw a person walk a dog across it. Of course. Ultimately, it's a couple of parcels that are a liability for the city right now. We have to mow it. It's part of our set of properties that we have to insure. All of this stuff, right? Grow a bunch of trees. Well, maybe so. But before we move on from this, the question that you asked is about developments that could be interrupted through this transition. Because there's going to be a transition of some sort. What I'm hoping for is that, again, if I'm still, around, mayor-elect I want to bring them in. And again, when I talked about introducing them and having conversations with each of the directors and departments, they would be filled in on the things that are in progress that aren't necessarily ready for prime time yet, but they can be introduced to those things in those conversations so that they can get up to speed, so that they can have a comfort level with where we are right now on something that's not complete and what they will need to do and what they can expect about the process moving forward. Now, I know the people of Cleveland Heights are going to choose who they're going to choose. I hope that when that choice is made, it is with an eye toward somebody who is actually interested in doing the hard work of encouraging redevelopment in our city. And part of that hard work is standing up to people who may be mad at you if you build something near them. It's a hard thing for politicians to do. And so we have to be careful and judicious about our choice. If that's what we say we want, in the general, we want our city to redevelop. We want new buildings built in our community because the average, median age of these houses is like, median birth year of these houses is before 1950. Well, because maybe it could be 1930 or something like that. But that's the key. That transition, yes, there could be developments that die as a result of a difficult transition.
So can we ask what the status is of the Taylor Tutor project?
Did you? Yeah. So yeah, it's honestly, you can see the work being done right now. Taylor Tutor is underway. I don't know how much you want to talk about sort of the attendant potential and projects that are sort of part of the larger vision, but Taylor Tutor is well on its way to being rehabilitated, historical, renovation there.
Estimated
Or like when
when it would start ready?
what do you think?
Next summer.
And then Kane Park should be ready to go then too, right?
So okay, I'm since you're not using a mic, so Kane Park. So okay, like right now, for instance, and we've got some signs up around Kane Park at the Taylor entrance, sort of detailing what we're doing at Kane Park right now. Kane Park is exciting. It is sort of our central park, really. It connects two business districts, which I think is an interesting thing. It's an arts park. It's got this extremely unique performance space that you just don't find anywhere else, right? So Kane Park is a gem in a particular way, and it's unique in a particular way. And for a very long time, we've neglected that, just like we neglected a whole bunch of other stuff. We've put millions of dollars into Kane Park under my administration. Things you won't see, things that only the performers will see when they come, and they're in the new green rooms, which are lovely. I'm gonna have to show people that. Like we're gonna have to go there and do at least a virtual tour, right? But what we're doing right now is an improvement in the sort of the Taylor Road entrance. We're adding these tiered steps and seating where we can get back to having those performances, maybe do a Shakespeare in the Park that doesn't require the Alma to be, used, or the Evans Amphitheater to be used, but it can be something a little bit more impromptu. Maybe we can create a space for just any acting troupe to just do a performance at the bottom of the hill and have seating there for people to watch it. Obviously, it'll be good for parents who don't want to, stand and watch their kids sled down the hill. They can maybe get a coffee or a hot chocolate from a coffee truck or something like that, and sit and watch their kids sled down the sledding hill. And then obviously the path to make it into Kane Park from Taylor right now is completely inaccessible to people with really severe mobility issues, for instance, the slopes are just too much. They're not compliant. And it is shameful that we ask people to take a wheelchair all the way down Superior to come in at the Lee Road entrance. That's shameful. And so we need to fix that. And that's what we're doing. We are maintaining the sledding hill. We will be replanting the trees. But another reason for this improvement is that we want Kane Park to be more connected to the Taylor Business District. We want, as that business district grows and is revitalized, in part because of the efforts of Mr. Weimer and WXZ, we want that activity to be augmented by its proximity and connection to Kane Park. And so having that entryway, having that seating, having that sort of landing pad at Kane Park, at that corner, right by the business district, that's an entryway into the park that extends the benefit of the business district. You can go to a shop, grab some food, and go sit in the park. Those sorts of connections, and then you create community there. It's a wonderful opportunity for us, and that's what we hope to see at Kane Park. I was hoping to keep working on it from this role, but that's not to be. But I do hope that the next administration and the next council pick that baton up and keep running with it.
The building is gorgeous.
Oh yeah, no, the Taylor Tudor buildings are lovely, and I think that the work that WXZ is doing on them will make them that much more useful to the community, but to the people using the buildings, the storefronts or office space or the apartments in a modern context, bringing them back into use will be a remarkable addition to that neighborhood and to that district.
The strip of stores on the other side of Taylor, those are planned houses.
Okay, so without the mic, I'll repeat.
Oh,
You were talking about the strip stores on the other side of Taylor. From, I don't know. Do you want to speak to that phase of the?
I'd rather not at this point. Maybe in the next town hall, but even prior to across the street, something a little closer.
Okay, so that's a little teaser for the next town hall. Maybe we'll focus on development and upcoming developments at the next town hall as a theme. But yeah, so a little bit of a teaser. Maybe we'll hear some more about what comes next on Taylor and in that business district. Okay, I don't know what time it is. 8:15. All right. Well, I want to thank all of you for being here and having this conversation. To the people watching at home, eventually, thank you for watching. And if you have any questions for the next town hall, please feel free to send them our way. And come on down and meet us next time, where maybe we'll be talking about development as a primary theme. All right.
Great.
Okay. Thanks, y'all.